Good afternoon. We're going to start the final panel discussion of the day in about 5 minutes' time. And this one is certainly looking into the unknown. This is about artificial intelligence and education. One of the questions certainly that parents are asking in terms of how we're using generative AI, how that's impacting both the curriculum and the future of our children. We're talking about the positives and indeed the negatives for both students and schools. So join us in about 5 minutes' time when we begin this discussion. Good afternoon and welcome to the final panel discussion of the Schools and Nursery Show on its first day. And what a fabulous first day it's been. Of course, tomorrow we will have 5 more panel discussions on a range of different topics. But the final panel discussion of today, I'm surprised that people aren't banging the house down to have hundreds of people listening to this, because it's such an unknown entity. It certainly is a new form of language that we're discussing, a new mindset and a new way for the future. Our job and our responsibility as educators is to somehow embrace the future and to embrace the unknown and the unseen, as it were. I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Saba Adan, who is the Director of Innovation in Teaching and Learning and Curriculum at GEMS Founders School, and Neil Statham, who is my Head of Digital Strategy at Heartland International School. I'm really grateful to the two of them for braving this discussion and being prepared to come and talk today about artificial intelligence and its place in education, the positives, the negatives, both for students and schools. Now, huge topic, Saba. We've talked before on the Schools and Nursery Show, and this is the first time we've talked about AI, which shows you that just in the last 12 months, how our language, our thinking, and the movement is changing. So its place in the curriculum, because parents are probably quite anxious about this.
So I'll start with saying that, unlike many things in education where it's the teachers and the school leaders introducing stuff, with AI it was the students who jumped on the board and tried out much more before any of their teachers. The reason is that it gives them that one-to-one that we all know is the ultimate point to reach in education, which in our existing structures is a dream, and with recent developments in adaptive learning and tools, we are getting closer, but not as quickly as what students need in this day and age. So we got these digital natives getting trained on games and where they get instant responses, instant gratification, but we have our education models where gratification is quite delayed and slow, often till the end of the year when they finally get their exams. So I think it's one of the technologies where education, unlike the previous trends, where education is normally the last one to get on board with a different trend in technology, education needs to lead the process. Many sectors, such as banking and industrial areas, they are really moving fast with AI developments now. But education is the one where they need to lead it, because the learnings in education will then enforce and inform everything in other sectors as well. I would like to add that, unlike the very a big fear that's going to replace teachers, is totally the other way around. Teachers can never be replaced, but the personalization element where we need quick responses, quick admin tasks, with AI, that's going to be super easy, more than ever before.
Neil, your thoughts on this, just opening up the discussion for the afternoon.
I think it's important in the curriculum now. We're at this tricky point where it's already happening. So in some ways we're building the plane while we're flying it, because lots of the people who are experts now and who are telling schools what to do were nowhere to be seen 6 months ago, where we really needed some of this information about what was going to happen next. There were some people, but not so many. So I think in terms of its current place in the curriculum and where it will end up are very different. So starting point for us at Heartland has been with some of our older students, because whilst it's impacting and is going to impact what happens in schools, for these students it's instantly going to impact the employment and university scene that they go into as well. So our starting point with some of them has been about what is actually happening now, what happened in the build-up to it, why do you need to know about it, and how is this going to impact you in the next 6 to 12 months? What will it look like in the sector that you are going to go and hopefully work in? Is it still going to exist in that same way? And the people that you're competing for jobs with in the future, what's the uptake like in that industry? So if you want to go and work in engineering in an average engineering company now, what kind of training are these people who you're going to be competing with for jobs already getting? What industry skills do those people have already that you need to at least be aware of and start to build up? Where it ends up in the future, I think, is a little bit different, because we were just discussing beforehand, education often gets some of the cast-off products from businesses, and they come to schools last and they try and sell them solutions, sometimes for problems that don't exist. But I think AI is going to be a lot different, because the applications for schools and for children are a lot more obvious. So, but I think it's going to first start with skills-based approach, which I think is similar to what you were saying.
One of the statements that we hear sort of bandied around again and again is, our young people, they're already using it, they're way ahead of the game, they're far more, we're behind because we're the educators and because we're older and not as adaptable. But at a recent conference I was at, it was really interesting from an expert who said, actually, that's not true. Because AI is just being built as we move along, a bit like Neil said about the plane. And actually, our children aren't any further ahead than us. It's just that they're more adaptive in terms of how they use it. How can we as educators, a lot of us who are not Generation Z, we're like me, we're from a different century. How can we make sure, though, that we do keep ahead of something that conceptually a lot of people still don't understand? There's a lot of people offering conferences and courses on it, but none of them are actually experts. How do we make sure that we somehow develop an education system that stays at least in time with it, if not ahead?
So that is the most interesting question, and I think the main central point which needs to be addressed to then ensure education is in line with the developments around the world. So I think first and foremost, we need to accept that we cannot predict what's coming in future with AI. It's changing every day, every week, with bigger companies now competing to come up with the best language models, best interface. It's not going to stop. We cannot predict where it's going. But what we can do is accept in schools that it's a learning journey for teachers, leaders, and students together. And then keep students involved in the entire process to ensure that when we go along with AI, we're getting benefit from the best of it, but at the same time, our ethics and policies are maintained, and students are on board with it, accepting that, yes, we have AI now, and it's a bit of unknown realm, but very soon there will be policies around it. So instead of getting them to think it's a tool to cheat, it's a tool to support them and excel, whichever level they are at. Even if they are high achievers, there is always a next level. And this tool is going to help them get the best out of their potential and their teacher support.
Yeah, some interesting things there we'll probably come back to in a second, actually, and follow up with the questions. But Neil, your thoughts on that? How are we going to make sure we're in the game, as it were, and we're part of the game?
I think we're more likely to stay in the game the less gimmicky the use of it is. So I think it's about working out which skills and uses are actually most beneficial, because I think with lots of technology that's come and gone in schools, a favorite example of mine is the goggles that you would put on, an immersive technology which everyone was buying, and it had sort of some uses, but not so much often, and then some of these things have disappeared as quickly as they've gone, and I think it will sustain if the uses for it are aligned and are linked to skills that we want students to have and skills that we want teachers to have. So I think the starting point is encouraging use and curiosity of it in safe parameters. So we've tried to sort of come up with what we feel are guiding statements for it rather than a rigorous policy, and that encourages people to at least be curious about it and not be fearful about how they use it, because everyone initially jumped on these pesky teachers are going to use it to do all the work for them, and so are these pesky kids are going to use it to write all their coursework and exams for them. But if we look at it through such a narrow scope, then I think it will go the way a lot of other technology has. So I think finding out where it can meaningfully save time for teachers, or it can solve problems, or it can start to address some of the big picture things. So like software, for example, like Century, where it can actually be an instant benefit to a teacher because it can do some of the work of the teacher in a meaningful way that's not time consuming, in a way that is accurate. Teachers are interested in that and are going to invest in it. But if it's about producing a gimmick or a fancy thing for a one-off lesson, then I think they're going to be probably rightly quite cynical about it.
I'm going to strip it back to a bit of history and some basics. And I think back to being a child and watching my mother with a typewriter. And then she went from an ordinary typewriter to an electric typewriter where you could backspace when you'd made a mistake, right? And this was such a cool thing to have. And of course, we then moved on to computers. And I remember submitting essays where you were able to spell check, and people said, that's cheating. because you're spell checking, you're not actually doing the work yourself, the computer's doing it. We're at that cusp, aren't we? You mentioned the word, Saba. You actually used the word about students using it as a tool to cheat, or students using it as a tool to empower them. However, is there something for schools to worry about in terms of efficacy and ethics, in terms of using AI to cheat, as it were? What do schools need to consider in terms of policy and practice?
So on that, I believe we need to have the same approach as schools take on e-safety. So the risks are all there. Internet is open to students. If you apply your firewalls and filters in school, there will be a place and a device where they can go and use it in the wrong ways. So our approach as adults and leaders can be to inform them, educate them, and make sure that they are aware of the disadvantages, the pros and cons, and then they become mature enough to take the right route and apply the right procedures. At the same time, we really need to make sure teachers are on board with the skills and the tools to make the difference between work which is generated fully by AI and then work which is with students thinking, their creativity, but maybe with support of AI. And that means there's a need for a lot of change in our curriculum and especially assessment design as well. Going back to the point where I said some people think, and you mentioned again, some people think that it will replace humans and teachers. In fact, now we have bigger need for teachers to be there, one, to have that personal connection, and then to consistently remind and train students on applying their ethics in their work. Because very soon we'll have tools which will 100% calculate the AI usage in work. We already have tools which can calculate to 70 to 80%. So very soon that cheating element will be controlled by technology. But students being able to ready to use the tool, which is such a powerful tool to empower themselves, that can come from teachers.
And I think we'd probably all agree. I mean, I used an example of being a child and having the Encyclopedia Britannica, and because I was one of the only people in the town that had one, I probably plagiarized more of my projects than anybody else did. That was cheating, let's be honest, okay? So AI is almost the same thing in terms of how we use it. What are the challenges, Neil, do you think that we face? How are we going to deal with the ethics and with those real questions about ownership of property and intellectual property and creation when it comes to AI?
Yeah, tricky, because I think it's about, part of this in terms of school use is about understanding what the rules of the game are, right? So you can, I think if you just say blanket ban, you can't use it, that's the most enticing thing for children to use. And I think if you were an adult employing anyone to do any kind of task, you would want them to use the best and most elegant, efficient or creative solution for it. So I think for children you can develop some of this ethical understanding by setting what the rules of the game are and why they are in that way. So where a task can be accentuated by use of, then allow and explain why. Where it's not to be used, I think if there's a strong reason why, not just because I said so, whether it's to do with skill development, then students are more likely to buy into that. But I think where the rules are arbitrary, that's where it's going to get slightly more difficult. In terms of digital property, it's already an issue now because we went through the phase of NFTs where we were talking more and more about the blockchain technology to authenticate who owns what. And then that's kind of died off a little bit now in terms of popularity, in terms of press. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more of that starting to come back in again. But I think lots of the work that students are doing in school is about building on thought that's already there as well. So I think again, it's about it's really no different to what's happening now. That, like you're saying, there's lots of this information is available out there. Lots of people have written about lots of the topics that we teach students in school. It's a sort of standing on the shoulders of giants thing, and I think that the rules for plagiarism really aren't going to change. Just the opportunities to take advantage of it are maybe a little bit different, or they may be more accessible. But there's nothing to stop students at the moment going online and going on. Just before it was websites where you could download essays that other people had written and you could put your own name on the bottom. And I think the technology for detecting it is going to develop at a similar rate as well. So I think it's best tackled for schools by dealing with the understanding and ethics. And teachers who know students know the work that they're capable of producing. And I think in our experience have been pretty on the money when they sense something is a little bit off and they just probe a little bit more. It can be tackled by sitting down with them and saying, tell me about this. You know, you wrote this paragraph. This is a really interesting one. Talk me through what you were thinking. And I think you can quite quickly get to the bottom of some of these things.
One of the things, just changing the subject slightly, one of the things that concerns me in terms of philosophically in my head, in terms of my thinking, you see, that's an AI child who's walking perhaps with a potential mobile phone in front of him and didn't see a single thing as he walked through, except where he was walking to. Almost a typical teenager already. One of the things that does bother me, and I'm conscious that we have a large number of people who will be watching this online over the next few days, not just now, is the gap between those who have and those who haven't. And whilst I can't change the world, ethically, I worry that AI will create an even greater gap between those who have and those who have not. And therefore, we're going to see bigger margins in terms of the world with poverty, those with wealth and those without wealth. How can we make sure that whilst our children are very privileged and potentially will have access to an awful lot of things that other children won't, how can we keep them grounded to make sure that they still understand our values and how we operate as people? How do we make sure we instill that in our schools while still exploring this amazing, amazing tool that they have that I wish I had had 40, 50 years ago?
Well, I think that's the most tricky question, because we know that with the algorithms that work behind large language models, the more you use it, the more it will be moved in that direction. And if it is getting used by people with certain viewpoints, certain demographic realities, then yes, that is something that can impact what knowledge looks like, or even what truth and reality looks like in future. And I think it's a bigger question, way bigger than just education alone. That's where governments needs to come together and ensure that there's equal representation and all the principles that's been applied so far to make this world a better place to live for everyone, privileged or non-privileged, stay same and is not getting impacted with those who have access to this technology. So I think that's a very broad question and probably one of the most unknown factors at this moment in time.
I'm actually going to pose you a different question. Because I'm conscious that I'm looking at the time, and this is a topic that we could be here right through the evening discussing. But one of the things that will probably cause some alarm and some concern for parents, you and I were at a conference recently where we listened to somebody talk to us about how AI creates a character in the background, as it were, and children believe that they're actually talking to a human being. And this character is promoting what it thinks is the correct answer because it's generative. And actually, we've got real issues around online safety and safeguarding and just pure safety of our children. What can parents do at home? Schools, I think we've got some measures in place, but what can parents do at home for a technology that we don't quite fully understand?
Yeah, I think, interestingly, the cheating thing is kind of the red herring, and it's sort of sitting there as the obvious thing. And like you see, meanwhile, going on in the background is a lot of social engineering and a lot of targeted advertising pushing things towards children. I think the online safety rules or online safety conversations are the same. They're just a lot more important now, or the danger of not having them is even more real, because we sort of reached the point where we moved away from the chat room era, and then as technology got better, it was more obvious who we were communicating with, and now we're going to have these targeted things. So I think it's vitally important that parents are having conversations with their children about what they're doing online and encouraging transparent use as much as possible. And putting a statistic on it, I would say more than 90% of these online issues that we have are schools that we end up getting involved in that didn't originate in school. School just happens to be the common factor, are caused by screens used behind closed doors with children who are not old enough for. And they reach for these extremities, or they get curious and they explore, and no one really knows what they're doing. So I think parents have to really support schools along with this, where we're having conversations with children and enforcing rules and good habits, the digital citizenship has to extend into home, and there it becomes the responsibility of the parent. And I think as a parent as well, modeling what you're using and what you're doing and reasons why you're not doing things. So if you're not signing up for Snapchat as a parent, it's not just because you're told, because maybe it's because you don't trust the technology, you're not sure about it, or actually you don't know where that photo goes once it's been deleted. So for that reason, I'm choosing not to do it. And maybe if I model and explain my thinking to you, you're more likely to take a more responsible choice rather than just a hard no.
So, Sava, do you think it's fair to say then that schools have got an even greater responsibility in the future in terms of parent partnerships, helping to educate parents, maybe providing greater guidance and greater policy so that parents better understand? Is our role even changing now? It's more about the parenting aspect and the use of the technology?
So I think it has always been the case, at least from, it has always been the case, but I think post-COVID time, the realization came far greater and in a stronger way that parents play an equally important role when it comes to ensuring that students are safeguarded in school, but obviously after school as well. And obviously parents are at the forefront of parenting and responsible for their child, but when it comes to things which are that, fastly developed. So what we have learned as a school, I would say that parents need to be constantly reminded and informed. Honestly, not all parents come from a technology background. Like we said earlier, the digital natives now are very different from our upbringing in children. Not all parents come from a career which is that heavily involved in these technological developments. So as for schools, I think it's equal as curriculum and teaching and learning. The responsibility extends to making sure parents are on board. And then having agreements and policies which kind of makes everybody responsible equally. But I will go back to the point again. We can do everything to make sure teachers are aware, trained, and parents are informed, but at the end of the day, it's the child who's at the forefront of it, and the device which is in their hand, and it literally takes a few minutes for them to decide to go in the wrong direction. So it's very important to take them on board in a way that they see that as something that's going to help and protect them, and not something that we are planning and designing against them. Only then it's possible to make sure that they are safe now and they will grow up as mature adults.
Neil, any further additional thoughts on that same topic?
I would just echo it, and I think it's a constant challenge for schools, because often when you want to use technology in schools, it's met with skepticism by parents, because they say things like, all right, they're already on their iPad for 3 hours when they get home. I don't want them on it at school as well. And you're saying, well, we're actually trying to use it for something different. But I think schools are trying to deliver a broad and balanced curriculum. And it's not possible to develop all of these digital skills that children are going to need in the time that they're there, whilst covering a breadth of other things. So I think we have to try and create this balance where it's about responsible screen time at home as well, because there's nothing better than when a child comes into school because they've got curious, so they've gone and invested their own time into learning and into using this technology. So I think we do have to strike that balance, like you say, about not putting them off and not creating, when we're talking about digital safety, about not creating a fear of using technology. And the same with teachers as well. We still want them to be curious, and we still want them to learn by doing and by experimenting. We can't be with them all the time, so that's where we need the help of the parents, and the parents can't be with them all the time as well. And that's where we need to develop that trust with them. We have to give them opportunities to earn the trust. And I think if we start from a standpoint of making it as safe as necessary, because it can't always be as safe as possible for them, because sooner or later they're going to be in that unsupervised environment. The more information we can arm them with, rather than hide from them, hopefully the more likely they are to make better decisions.
So I'm conscious that there aren't as many people on the floor this afternoon listening to this, and I know that there are, however, a lot of people who are online listening, but I will just ask for those that are here, I'm not trying to put them on the spot, if anybody does have a question for our panel at this time. No? Okay, that's good. Maybe we've answered all the questions. Let's finish then with, final thoughts. Just final thoughts and final words about what we would say to parents, maybe what you would say to school leaders who haven't yet started on this journey, Just some snippets of wisdom to sum up your thinking. Saba, start with you.
So I would say that we need to learn from our history and human race patterns that's there with every innovation and invention. So the fear that came in when computers were invented, and the fear of people losing job being as typewriters, and then the fear that came in with internet. I think we need to learn from that pattern and not do the same mistake again. Instead of thinking of the cons, we need to spend time and energy learning about the advantages that comes with it, because only then we will be in line with the technology developments and come up with something which is holistic, ethically approved, and in the favor of our students' future.
Thank you. And Neil, your final thoughts on the topic?
I would say always be a little bit skeptical when it comes to things like this. Don't believe everything that you read and that you see. The best way to find out about it is by trying. So if you have a curious child, sit down with them and try it together. Encourage open conversation about it, and look underneath the flash of the I can get it to do this for me to the deep and meaningful uses of it, and try to develop skills and habits that will be conducive to ethical, responsible, long-term use, rather than just looking for the cool and flashy things that it can do now.
Well, the most rewarding takeaway of the afternoon for me is that reassurance that Saba gave me that I'm not going to be out of a job. But let's see, this time next year it might actually be an augmented version of me sitting here having conversations with people, and I'll be on the golf course busily, happily hitting some balls. But look, it's fantastic to have this discussion. It's a never-ending discussion. It certainly is infinity and beyond, as they say, and we know that there's a lot more for us to both learn and to explore, and I hope people believe, like we do, that these are actually exciting times as opposed to terrifying times. This is the technology that we as human beings can manipulate for our benefit to hopefully make mankind better. My huge thanks to Saba for her expertise this afternoon, and to Neil for his expertise this afternoon. This is the final panel discussion of the day from the Schools and Nursery Show. Please do stay with us. Please make sure that you watch and join all of the schools around this afternoon to continue those important discussions about education and the role of technology in education. And from a panel perspective, we look forward to welcoming you back tomorrow morning, where we will begin our first panel discussion at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. So until then, thank you to my expert, esteemed colleagues this afternoon, and thank you for your time for listening to us today.